Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. This is an educational channel and we look at theories of everything in depth. We look at a lot of the primary sources, go over it usually word for word and with some annotations from me. And this is video number 306 that we've done on Dewey B. Larson's reciprocal system of theory. Mr. Larson was an engineer in the 20th century, and he came out with his two fundamental postulates for the reciprocal system in the late 1950s. Basically, the first postulate, which is by far the most important, says that we live in a universe made entirely of motion. Not matter, not energy, but motion. Matter and energy are just two different kinds of motion, along with all the other different scientific quantities that we know of: acceleration, temperature, pressure, density, electric charge and electric current, magnetic flux, permeability, permittivity, force, matter and energy, and gravity, and many other things. They're all forms of motion, and motion is characterized by being a relationship between space and time. So that sets up a generalized reciprocal relationship between space and time. All those different forms of motion are basically fractions with time or space as the numerator and space or time as the denominator. For example, speed. The car is moving 20 miles an hour. 20 miles of space in 1 hour of time. Space over time is speed. And its inverse, time over space, is energy. It took me 3 hours to move that thing 10 feet. 3 hours of time in 10 feet of space. Time over space. Matter is time to the third power over space to the third power. Pressure is time over space to the fourth power. Acceleration is space over time to the second power, and so on and so forth. Now, there are a few things you have to keep in mind. Just like in the equation for matter there, time and space both have aspects that are three-dimensional. This is what Larson calls coordinate time and coordinate space. This is something that we're very accustomed to when talking about space, three-dimensional space, but not so much when we're talking about three-dimensional time. And then also space and time both have aspects that are what Larson calls clock, or a scalar progression. A scalar motion is a motion that has a magnitude but has no particular direction, like a clock. A clock is always getting later and later and later and later, but in no specific direction. And if you took a balloon and you put dots on it, you blew up the balloon, all of the dots would be moving away from each other. That's a way to envision the progression of space. Whereas time is always getting later and later and later, space is always getting farther and farther and farther apart. That is clock space, clock time and clock space. And then also space and time both are quantized, meaning that they have their minimal units. 1 unit of space, if you don't have a full unit, then you don't have space. And if you don't have a full unit of time, then you don't have time. But if you do have a full unit of space in a full unit of time, as remember, space over time is speed. So 1 unit of space in 1 unit of time is the speed of light, which Larson refers to as unit speed. 1 over 1 equals 1. And for Larson, unit speed has a different significance than in the legacy science system, where, like according to Einstein's dicta, there is, or dictum, there is the speed of light is the maximum speed of the universe. Nothing can go faster than the speed of light. But in Larson's system, the speed of light is the midpoint of the universe, the null point, the origin, the background, the state of rest, the null point, the reference system of the universe. Measurements are made from the speed of light, and half of the universe is actually moving faster than the speed of light, and then half is moving slower than the speed of light. This first half is called the cosmic sector, and then the second half is called the material sector. And the material sector is really the only sector that the scientists know anything about until Larson came along. And but if they got on board with Larson, they could realize that they could understand what's going on in the cosmic sector merely by extrapolating from the material to the cosmic sector, because what's going on in one sector is identical to what's going on in the other sector, except that you have to reverse the roles of space and time, interchange the roles of space and time. So in the material sector, you have 3 dimensions of space and progressing time, always getting later and later. And this is the world that we're accustomed to in the material sector. In the cosmic sector, you have 3 dimensions of time, and you have clock space, progressing space. Space is always getting farther and farther and farther apart. So that shows you a little bit of how that works. Now, Larson came out with these postulates, and then he used the process of deduction that he outlined and that I read into the record about 8 months ago in about 15 videos. That's called The Outline of the Deductive Development of the Reciprocal System. He goes through about 165 steps of going from his initial postulates to a theoretical universe, which is a universe that says, well, if the reciprocal system is correct and these fundamental postulates are correct, this is what the universe is going to look like. And then he compared his theoretical universe to the universe that the physicists and scientists and chemists and so on had measured. So he has a book, for example, that's called The Basic Properties of Matter, that we will look at later on this series. And he goes through, some of the basic properties of matter, such as, say, compressibility or the melting point. And he theoretically derives values for those things from his theory only, and then he compares the results that he gets with the actual laboratory results that the scientists have come up with, usually very favorably. And in some cases, he even makes corrections of their erroneous data. And that's a very interesting study, and it's also a way that you can kind of learn the reciprocal system a little bit better too. Now, unfortunately, Mr. Larson died back in 1990, and he did leave behind a handful of researchers that were gung-ho to extend the system to other areas and to solidify the system, to shore up any of the weak points of the system. And one of them was Dr. KVK Nehru. We're looking at a paper that he wrote today that is called Language, Experience, and Delusion. And this is kind of a contribution to linguistics. Larson wrote some stuff in so-called social sciences. He has got a couple of books on economics, and he actually in those books he actually says that it's really erroneous, at least for him, for assigning economics to a social science. It's actually a real science, and should be taught that way now that the reciprocal system is around and has figured out basically the economic system, what the system of economics is. He also, though, has a book on metaphysics, which includes philosophy, religion, and psychology. So he does dip into the liberal arts. Here, Nehru is going into linguistics. Now, we started this article yesterday, so if you want to hear the beginning of the article, go back and listen to yesterday's show. Today, we're going to get into the second part, and he's basically using the reciprocal system to kind of show some of the shortcomings of language, and he is using a lot of Hopi from Benjamin Lee Whorf, the linguist from early 20th century, early to mid 20th century, and especially looking at how these different words have to do with both spatial quantities and temporal quantities and qualities. So this next section here is called Nouns of Physical Quantity. In our language, we have two kinds of nouns denoting physical items: nouns indicating individual things, and nouns for a mass of things. Water, wood, sand, air are examples of the latter. Nouns for a mass of things. Such nouns denote a uniform medium without implied boundaries. Convenience demands that these nouns be individualized by some further linguistic tool. Consequently, we say a glass of water, a bag of sugar, or a dish of food. In all these cases, the nexus of denotes contents. But the formula does not lend itself to a heap of sand, a block of ice, a stick of wood, or a lump of sugar. In these cases, if we withdraw the contents, we are left with no container. But the linguistic pattern is identical, and so while it denotes contents in the obvious cases, it suggests contents in the other inobvious cases. The heaps, blocks, sticks, and lumps seem to contain something, a stuff, so to say. In fact, the philosophic notion of substance or matter can be seen to arise out of this naive linguistic practice. Whorf explains, quote, "Our language patterns often require us to name a physical thing by a binomial that splits the reference into a formless item plus a form. Thus, with our binomial formula, we can say and think a moment of time, a second of time, or a year of time. The pattern is simply that of a bottle of milk or a piece of cheese, end quote. Thus, we are assisted to imagine that a summer actually contains or consists of such and such a quantity of time. In Hopi, one does not say, it's a hot summer, or summer is hot, or summer is not hot. Summer is not hot. Summer is only when conditions are hot. One does not say this summer, but summer now, or summer recently. There is no objectification. As a region, an extent, a quantity of the subjective duration feeling. Nothing is suggested about time except the perpetual getting later of it. And so there is no basis here for a formless item answering to our, quote, time. Okay, this section is called temporal verbs. The three-tenths problem, or the three-tenths system of past, present, and future is in congruence with this objectified time and colors all our thinking about time. In Hopi, on the other hand, one finds a two-tenths system of earlier and later, which corresponds better with the actual experience of duration. If we inspect consciousness, we find no past, present, or future, but a unity embracing complexity. Everything is in consciousness, and everything in consciousness is and is together. Where real time comes in is that all this consciousness is getting later, changing certain relations in an irreversible manner. We can, of course, construct and contemplate in thought a system of past, present, and future in the objectified configuration of points on a line. This is what our general objectification tendency leads us to do, and our tenth system confirms. This section is called Adjectives Doing for Verbs. Consider, for example, how we express color. We render it by adjectives. We say the green pasture. This practice makes us see color as a quality or attribute of things. This enables us to abstract color and see it in artificial isolation, greenness by itself. Now, in Russian and Italian, color is rendered by verbs, something like the pasture greens. Color is seen as an activity or modification that cannot be abstracted out from the thing. We say the light shines, the stream shimmers, or the teeth gleam. In this usage, we cannot detach the glitter or the gleam from the thing, like a smile cannot be from the face. Thus, adjectival and verbal modes of rendering represent two different worlds of thought, and the whole way in which a fact articulates itself is contingent on the linguistic modes adopted. Okay, this section is called Spatial Metaphors. We say a long time, a short while, deep sorrow, an elevating influence. We say we do not grasp the line of so-and-so's thinking, since he never comes to the point. This pattern is part of our objectification syndrome. It suggests an imaginary space into which we are inveigled to locate non-spatial items and see them there. But in Hopi, abundant linguistic devices express intensity, tendency, and duration directly. And there is no space term to be pressed into service when space is not involved. Thus, the Hopi thought world has no imaginary space. It does not locate a thought dealing with real space anywhere but in real space. It does not therefore see that physical things are in any way insulated from the powers of thought and life. Okay, let's see. We try to do one more section here. Nouns versus verbs. Nouns and verbs have different grammatical and logical properties. English prefers nouns. Hopi prefers verbs. We tend to say, I had a bad dream, rather than I dreamt badly. It is part of our objectifying tendency. Sadly, this strips what is being talked about of all vividness. Consider the noun dream and the verb to dream or dreaming. In the former, we objectify, isolate, and look at dream as though it were a thing. Spontaneity, the distinguishing quality of life from form, is conveyed by the verb, whereas the noun reifies it into a thing. Regrettably, in English, some of the most important words that denote or ought to denote activity per se have no seminal verb at all. Examples are awareness, consciousness, intelligence, and wisdom. If we can coin conch and intellige as verb forms, or consciousness and intelligence as verb forms of consciousness and intelligence, we see what a world of difference it makes to say, I conch, or the creature conches, or he intelliges. Our preference for nouns lands us in another oddity. We first deintegrate the whole and then look at it as a sum of its parts. For example, in a fountain, a river, and a pond, we are able to see water as the common element. This makes us see a river as water plus flowing. Thus, we fail to see the reality as it is. In Hopi, on the contrary, a fountain, a river, and a pond not only have different names, but the linguistic pattern does not instigate them to abstract anything like water from a fountainous form or a rivery flow. They appreciate each situation holistically. Worf observes that while the habitual thought of speakers of our language, with its preference for nouns, analyzes reality largely in terms of things or bodies plus formless items like matter or substance, the Hopi thought world analyzes largely in terms of events, or more aptly, eventings, which is interesting. That is a word that Buckminster Fuller uses quite often. He remarks from the form plus substance dichotomy, belong materialism, psychophysical parallelism, and dualistic views of the universe in general. Newtonian space, time, and matter are no intuitions. They are receipts from culture and language. That is where Newton got them. Hard to believe, but true. Okay, that's the end of that section. The next section is called Rupa and Arupa levels, and we will get into that tomorrow. Thanks for tuning in today, and we will hopefully see you again tomorrow. Have a great night.